Now, I know I said I'd cover Michael Bay's Megatron, and I will, but I also like talking about films and shows that are actually good, so I will talk about how his film version differs from the TV counterparts. The Megatron that appears in the 2007 film is actually quite scary. He has really sharp teeth and weird hands. But when we're shown Megatron in flashbacks, this man is actually menacing. As we see, he's got bodies littered everywhere, and he just throws spears at one guy from about a mile away. Now, I promise I will never say this again, but Michael Bay gave us one good thing, and that's Megatron's teeth.
Best teeth in the fucking game.
And the reason why I'm saying this is because the idea of the sharp teeth was actually later used in Transformers Prime's Megatron, and that motherfucker was something else. More on him later. In the 2007 film, we're told Megatron wants to use the Allspark to turn all of Earth's technology into Decepticons, despite arriving on Earth millions of years before technology. And then later it's changed, so that he wasn't chasing the Allspark, but instead meeting Sentinel on Earth's moon. Not before it being changed to him wanting to get the Allspark for the Fallen. What the fuck is this plot? Now, if we ignore the fucking plot, we can take a look at Megatron's actions. In Transformers 1, he has a group of cult followers who would willingly kill any human they see to free him. And once he's free, he kills Jazz and begins to stalk Sam, even seeming to play with him, as I doubt a robot the size and viciousness of Megatron would just stand still and convince Sam to hand over the cube, but instead wants Sam to give up the cube willingly out of some sort of sadistic need to watch Sam kill his own people. Now, this is a long shot, but note the way Megatron speaks. Whenever addressing Sam, he calls him boy.
Give me that cube, boy! I smell you, boy!
Which is what old racist people used to call people of African American descent, which is bad, but could be used as a good character building point for Megatron, as it could show he has a superiority complex, and he treats Sam like a piece of meat, commonly saying he just wants to scrape the flesh off Sam's bone, and that Sam could even be his pet. Sadly, this character depth was dropped after Age of Extinction, as he actually addresses people by their names and even seems to drop his allegiance to the Decepticons, who by this point in the movies have basically just become criminals, and not robots built for war. I don't remember where I heard this, but I saw in one piece of Transformers media that most of the Decepticons were warriors, and that's why they're such a devastating force, while the Autobots were mostly comprised of scientists and engineers, and that's why they lose so much. Yet in Transformers The Last Night, both sides basically just don't exist, so all that script I just wrote doesn't mean anything. Now, while Megatron loses all personality by The Last Night, he does have some in the original trilogy, and in Age of Extinction they set up Galvatron, which actually had some potential with his new Decepticons. I wonder what they did with... oh my god.
We were brothers once.
Now, Megatron's incarnations all stem from the original cartoon, and Galvatron was later introduced in the 1986 movie, and that movie actually shows Megatron seeming to be threatening. Not that he wasn't in the TV show, but the TV show had some regulations the film didn't, which is why its kill count is so high that it can actually beat some of Dead Meat's kill count. Now, Megatron actually wins in this movie, off-screen of course, but we learn at some point between 1985 and 2005, Megatron returns to Cybertron, builds an army, and just wins? In the live-action movies, Megatron's kill count was kinda low, as he just kills Jazz and Optimus. Also in the 86 movie, he kills Brawn, Ironhide, and Optimus in the first act of the movie, and that's before he becomes Galvatron, but Megatron from the Aligned continuity is just something else. The Megatron from the War and Cybertron games is just pure evil, and it's a lot more like Megatron from Transformers Animated. You see, the Megatron in the films acts a lot like his Generation 1 counterpart, not in the looks department, but in personality. Megatron in the films is a lot more sneaky and rat-like, as in the game Transformers Dark of the Moon, we see him hiding away in his base, biding his time and sending other Decepticons on raids. Now, Megatron and Optimus in the films don't feel like they have the same relationship they have in other properties, even though prequel comics show us that they did indeed used to be brothers in arms, while in the films it's a kill-on-sight situation, which is pretty basic compared to other iterations. To fully understand Megatron's character in the Bay films, let's dive into his other incarnations and their respective relationships with Prime. Do note, however, I won't be talking about Armada's Megatron, as I haven't seen much of Armada and I don't want to butcher it. In Generation 1, Megatron is a fierce warrior who was literally built for evil. He was smart and cunning. He didn't rely on getting support from other Cybertronians, instead had them forcefully and permanently reprogrammed to support him. But he does have bots that do just support him, like Skywarp, Soundwave and Shockwave. He sees all other bots below him except for one. We see in Megatron's many fights with Optimus that he sees him as a sort of rival that is worthy of his time. Whenever Megatron actually does realise he's way out of his depths and is completely boned, he actually always asks Optimus for help. A few moments like when fighting Bruticus or stopping Devastator from blowing up the Earth. But going back to the 1986 movie, we see Optimus and Megatron have their last battle, as they both agree that this is where it ends with the iconic line,
One shall stand, one shall fall.
and the two duke it out in an all-out fight to the death. And right as Megatron is losing, we see another character trait of Gen 1 Megatron, is his snake-like tendencies, as we see him seem to pull a 180 and begs for mercy. Megatron isn't a buffoon, in fact he's incredibly smart, and knows how to get a few extra seconds of time that he needs. He's a brilliant schemer, and we've seen throughout the show that, and with other examples like trying to use plasma in Transformers Devastation, or wiping out the Autobot resistance in the movie. We even see in the Generation 1 episode War Drawn, which gives us the origin of Optimus Prime, we see how a dock worker called Orion Pax was lied to by Megatron. Upon learning that Orion stores Energon, Megatron charms Orion and shows off his flight abilities and plays into Orion's naivety, which ultimately costs him his life, which ironically leads to the birth of Megatron's one true enemy, and we see how Megatron is mowing down his innocent bots until he meets Optimus, who isn't affected by Megatron's blaster, singling him out as Megatron's one true adversary.
Dead. You! Who are you? Your worst nightmare.
Megatron and Prime's fights have always been brutal, as Megatron says he'll tear out Prime's eyes, or like using a lightsaber-like device to cut and etch at Optimus. Transformers Animated, it turns out that the Cybertronian War is already over, and that the Autobots banished the Decepticons to the stars. One interesting thing to note is that the difference between the cons and the bots. The Decepticons are much bigger than the Autobots, with Decepticons like Starscream beating them and being much bigger than the Autobots, not to mention that we don't follow a grizzled veteran Optimus Prime, but instead a green-as-grass space bridge repairing expelled college student. In fact, none of the main cast has a real weapon. Optimus has his axe, and Bulkhead has his wrecking ball, and Prowl his shurikens. But the Decepticons have blasters and missiles and the power of flight, and we learn from Ratchet that the Autobots weren't meant to fly, and Sentinel says that they took the blueprints of Starscream so we could build a bot that can fly.
Impossible! No Autobot flies!
Rules were meant to be broken. You gotta tune up or tune out, old bot.
While you've been busy rusting on this moisture-laden rock, we've been making some improvements back on Cybertron. We upgraded these twins using specs downloaded from Starscream while we had him in captivity.
This would have been great information to know before we nearly slagged each other.
And the fact that they used blueprints shows us they didn't know how to fly. This indicates that the power of flight was something invented during the war and isn't the first thing that was invented. During Animated's war, we learned that Transformers like Omega Supreme were built in the war. That means Titans were invented as weapons. This isn't the only thing that Animated did different, for example making Magnus be a better rank above Prime, so everyone has Prime at the end of their name. Now, Megatron's whole goal of that show is just to rule Cybertron, as it normally is. Now, due to the fact that the films possibly influenced the show, Megatron's goal was to get the Allspark and use its power to build an army so he could win. Now, this war was so bad that the Autobots shot the Allspark into space, causing the Decepticons to leave. This shows that the Decepticons were so powerful that they had to shoot their most powerful weapon into space so they could leave. Now, Megatron in this show is the equivalent of Rockstar re-releasing GTA 5 because they're trying to aim for Skyrim levels of re-releasing the same game as many times as possible. Now, to translate that gamer speak to English, what I mean is he survives everything and eventually comes back. Now, he starts off by surviving an assassination attempt by Starscream, you know, classic Caesar stuff. But Megatron survives this and becomes a talking head, who hacks the city of Detroit and manipulates and attempts to murder the Autobots. Then he gets his body back, and this is where things go from 5 to 11. Megatron kidnaps the Autobots' second human ally and then proceeds to find a place the Autobots can't find him. He manages to have a spy placed in Autobot Command, who just so happens to be the head of intelligence. He then builds a space bridge and takes control of Omega Supreme. Transformers animated Megatron has fantastic battle IQ. He plots 5 moves ahead, and while Starscream sees a clone army of Starscreams, Megatron sees an army of Omega Supremes. Not to mention, he always draws fear from the main cast, and you see Optimus has never had a lot of fear in Transformers Animated, but when Megatron returns, we see his fear on full force. Megatron just wants to see how far he can push the young Prime, as when he's beaten, he just tells Prime to kill him. But Megatron's best incarnation is found in Transformers Prime and the War and Fall of Cybertron games. Now, one thing you need to understand is the difference between Megatron in the aligned continuity and Megatron in everything else. He isn't at his full strength in the movies. He's running on a small amount of Decepticons, and when he does get back up, they quickly all die. And in animated, he only had like 6 Decepticons on one ship, and the rest were scattered across the stars. But in the aligned continuity, we see Megatron at his full strength in War for Cybertron. We see Megatron's army at its peak, and in War for Cybertron, his army drops all forms of formality and acts more like a savage bunch of, well, highly trained killers. And in Transformers Prime, his army is smaller, it's probably the smallest it'll ever be, but he still does beat the Autobots at everything, and we see him destroy the hometown of the Autobots, takes it completely over and builds just a new Death Tower of Death, with cannons able to shoot beams of utter destruction everywhere. He even has like Energon caches all over the place and Predacon skeletons, because it turns out he cloned Autobot versions of dinosaurs. Why? It's never really given. It's just given that he just planned that far ahead. Megatron is a monster in this show, as we learn he tore out Bumblebee's voice box and corrupted the planet's core by mastering control of Dark Energon, which is a form of Energon which cannot be controlled, and we see that the station meant to contain it was blown up by it. Keep in mind, Megatron controlled it. Megatron wins a lot of these occasions by controlling Cybertron's core or destroying a whole town and sending the Autobots running. He easily has the best military mind out of other incarnations, as we're told he served as a gladiator and at one point a politician. He knows how to manipulate and to fight. Now, I don't want to talk about Megatron's incarnations after the aligned continuity because they don't have much impact on the films. For example, Netflix's Megatron has no impact on the films whatsoever, so I could do a whole other video on that Netflix show. But I can talk a little about Galvatron. Galvatron is an upgraded form of Megatron. The main difference is that he's mostly insane, as in G1 he went completely mad until he's placed into an asylum, so he can heal. And in the movies, he loses all development and just wants to turn the planet into metal so he can build a new army, which is exactly what he wanted to do in the first film. Now, this actually did have potential, as Megatron had to find a way to build his army without just, well, a MacGuffin. But that all goes away, as in the next movie, he just reverts back to Megatron. Galvatron, in my mind, is a really undeveloped character, as he's either just Megatron with a different coat of paint, or is literally just a different character. I like how in Age of Extinction, Galvatron tells Prime he can't be killed as he hasn't got a spark anymore, and he will always return.
You have no soul.
That is why I have no fear. You die.
Now we can enter the final chapter of this video. Going back to what I said at the start of the video, we can use the information we now know to point out the flaws of the live-action Megatron and compare him to his counterparts. Megatron wasn't in the 2007 film enough to have much of a personality, but as the films go on, and by Dark of the Moon, he acts like his G1 self, with him having many schemes, but he is pretty shallow. He never has a true reason of him being evil. We are told why he's evil in the prequel comics, but we shouldn't be forced to read to learn why someone's evil. This is where the other Megatrons are better. G1 Megatron was built for evil, while the aligned Megatron had good intentions, but they were corrupted, and animated never told us why. But in his defense, the live-action Megatron is a good villain, you just need to look closely. But in his defense, the 3 Megatrons we covered had games and at least 3 seasons of time to develop, while the live-action Megatron had 3 poorly made films. But if you ask me which Megatron was best, I'd have to say Family Guys. Now, next video might be a Gears of War video or a Doctor Who video, so why don't you vote down below? And with this completely pointless discussion out of the way, till next time.